The other day, I took my grandkids to a little indoor play area where they had a little sort of town set up. There were all kinds of little tiny buildings all around the edge of the room that represented different things like the grocery store or the school or the veterinarian's office. It was really cute. And in the center of all the buildings was a sort of a park with things like slides and climbing structures. So while the kids were playing, my youngest granddaughter fell. And before I could get over to her, another little girl stopped to help her up. And she asked her if she was okay, and she was just super sweet to her. And it got me to thinking about why some kids are naturally quick to show kindness, while others aren't quite there yet. You know, that little girl didn't hesitate. No adult prompted her, no one told her what to do. She just simply noticed that somebody was hurt and she stepped in to help. And that doesn't happen by accident. Kids learn that kind of response from the environments that they're in and the adults that they're watching. Somewhere along the way, somebody modeled for that little girl what it looks like to notice others and to care and to act kindly. She'd seen it enough times that it just became an instinct for her to do that. And it was such a good reminder for me, especially as a teacher, that kindness isn't just something that we tell kids about. It's something that they absorb from what they see day after day. That little moment probably felt very small to her. She didn't even remember it probably, but to my granddaughter and to me watching it happen, it mattered. And it reinforced exactly why modeling kindness in our homes and our classrooms is so incredibly important. So that's our topic today, teaching kids to be kind. So let's get started. When I think about teaching children to be kind, I really believe it starts with the adults that they're surrounded by. Kids learn kindness from what they see. They learn it from the way people talk to each other, how they handle frustration, solve problems, and how they treat others. And the hard truth is that not every child comes to school from a home where kindness is modeled consistently. Some kids come from homes with lots of yelling, sarcasm, hitting, or unkind words. And kids do what kids do. They model what they see. So when those behaviors show up in the classroom, it's not necessarily because a child is bad. It's just often because that's what they've learned. As teachers, we have kids coming into our classrooms from all different environments, and that can make teaching things like kindness really challenging. So when kindness is a problem in your classroom, when kids are being mean to one another, excluding others, or speaking harshly, you have to become the adult who models kindness every single day. And that doesn't mean you can't be strict. You absolutely can. But being strict doesn't mean being unkind. Children watch us the same way as they watch the adults in their homes. They notice our tone, they notice our words, they notice how we react when we're frustrated, and they're going to model exactly what they see from us. That's why I don't think kindness can just be something that you write into your lesson plans and check off like, okay, this week in social emotional learning, we're going to learn about kindness. I mean, yes, you should build some lessons about kindness into your plans, but really, it just has to be a part of your everyday life in the classroom, because that's really how you're teaching kids how to treat each other. Discipline is a really good example of this. There's lots of ways to discipline a child, and sometimes, if we're being honest, teachers don't always show kindness when they're upset. We're human. Sometimes we yell, sometimes we snap. And having a bad day or losing your cool once in a while doesn't make you a bad teacher. But if yelling, sarcasm, or harsh reactions are happening every day in your classroom, that's what's worth doing some self-reflection. Because we have to ask ourselves, what am I teaching kids when I respond like this? So let's talk about some practical ways to intentionally teach kindness. One of the easiest places to start is with books. There's so many great picture books that open the door to conversations about kindness. One of my absolute favorites is called I Walk with Vanessa. It's actually a wordless picture book, but through the pictures, it shows a little girl who's getting bullied by her classmates. And another child notices this on her way home. So the next day, she stops at Vanessa's house on the way to school and offers to walk with her. And that simple little act of kindness totally changed everything for Vanessa. Suddenly, she was accepted by the other kids, and it's a perfect book that shows kids how one small act of kindness can mean the world to another person. Another one of my favorites is called The Invisible Boy, and it's by Trudy Ludwig. In this book, there's a little boy named Brian who's sort of quiet and shy, and he just is sort of invisible to the other kids. He never gets asked to play, he doesn't get invited to birthday parties, and so he just always feels sort of left out. So one day, a new boy named Justin joins their class, and Brian is the only one who makes him feel welcome. He smiles at him, and when Nathan gets fun up for what he's eating for lunch, Brian puts a little note in his cubby and tells him that he thought it looked good. So Nathan remembers this, and when they're allowed to work in groups for a class project, Nathan invited Brian to join his group, and that changed everything for Brian. The other kids started to invite him to eat lunch with them, and you can just see how it starts to change everything for Brian. He was starting to get included, and he wasn't invisible anymore. There's lots of great books that teach about kindness for kids. In fact, I wrote a blog post with 30 different amazing titles, and I'll link to it in the show notes if you want to find more books about that topic. All right, so besides reading stories, there's other ways that you can teach kids about kindness. In my classroom, we spend a few minutes each day during our morning meeting learning about different social-emotional learning topics like respect or friendship or gratitude, and of course, kindness. We would actually spend about a month focusing on kindness. I had daily slides that we used, and we do different activities that helped kids understand what kindness actually looks like. For example, one day we might do a little role playing. I'd choose one or two kids to act out a situation where somebody was being unkind, maybe being a bully or not sharing or not including someone in a game or something like that. It'd be things that the kids would have to deal with as a regular part of growing up. And so I'd have a couple kids role play a situation, and then we'd stop and we'd talk about it. We'd talk about how it could be handled differently or what would be the kind thing that they could do instead. I think that role playing is really powerful because it can show kids what kindness looks like in real life situations that they deal with every day on the playground, in the lunchroom, in class, and even in their neighborhood. Another day, we might write about it. I'd give them a little scenario like if someone was being a bully on the playground or if someone wouldn't let another kid play or something like that, and ask them to write or draw about how they could respond in a kind way. And then on Fridays, this was the best. This was so fun. We had what I'd call a secret mission. I'd give the kids a small act of kindness they needed to complete that day. It might be something like ask a new friend to play or sit with someone at lunch or maybe just giving somebody a compliment. And then at the end of the day, we'd come back together and we'd talk about how they showed kindness that day and did they complete their secret mission. And everybody got a chance to share. And then they earned a little sticker to put in their little notebook that they had. So when you spend an entire month focusing on one topic like kindness or respect or whatever, it really starts to stick. They begin to understand not just what kindness is, but how to practice it in their everyday life. I have an entire kindness unit in my TPT store that has the slides and writing prompts and everything in it. You can take a closer look at that at 𝘆ciland.com/kindness, or I'll put the link in the show notes. All right, and then beyond structured lessons that you have in class, I think kindness also has to show up in your everyday language. If you see a child being hurtful to another kid, instead of just yelling at them and sending them to timeout or something, talk to them about it. Ask them, are you being kind to so-and-so? Right now, are you being nice? Are you using kind words? And actually use that word kind so it makes the kids think about what that word really means. A lot of time when you ask a child if they're being kind, they'll either just stare at you or maybe they'll nod their head that they aren't being kind. So follow up with, questions like, what could you do instead? How could you show kindness right now? Sometimes that kind of simple shift and pointing it out to the child that they aren't being kind can really help, especially if you've been doing some sort of acting out or role playing about kindness, because they're going to start to see themselves in the situation and they're more than likely going to want to change their behavior. And honestly, as hard as this is, sometimes I think as teachers, we have to keep ourselves in check too. At least I know I did. I think I was a fairly strict teacher. I wasn't mean to the kids, but I was very structured. And of course, I had those kids that pushed my buttons and could be very challenging. And try as hard as I might to stay positive, sometimes those kids could push me to the limit. The ones I'm talking about. We all have them in our class. And so sometimes when I was tired, or maybe I didn't feel well, or I was just feeling overwhelmed by the day, Instead of talking kindly to a child that was, talking too much or not listening or whatever, I might get a little gruff and just say something like, knock it off. And I had to stop and ask myself, are those kind words? And so I had to stop myself and think, am I really demonstrating the kind of behavior that I want my students to see? And so as teachers, I think we have to be willing to look at ourselves and ask what we're modeling to our students as well. Think about a common situation like a kid who won't stop talking during carpet time. Maybe you've asked them multiple times to stop talking and now you're at your breaking point. There's a big difference between saying, get off the carpet, and saying, I've asked you several times to stop talking and you're choosing not to listen, so now you'll need to go to your seat. The expectation is the same, the consequence is the same, but the tone is completely different, and students will notice that. Nobody's perfect. There's going to be occasions when you lose your cool in class, but if that's how you act every day when kids are out of control or talking too much or whatever, then that's when you have to start to reflect and think of other ways that you can speak to your students to get your point across. I think one of my favorite things I ever did to help build kindness in my classroom was to talk to them about what I called our gifts. I used to tell my kids that everybody brought some kind of gift into our classroom. It wasn't a birthday present or a Christmas present, but it was something special that they brought that made our classroom better. Some kids had the gift of reading. Some were great writers. Some were artists and could draw great pictures. Some kids were great helpers, and other kids always made us laugh. And some kids were just really great at tying shoes. Every child brought something to our classroom that they were good at, and all of our gifts were important. And as the year went on, whenever I'd notice a child's strength, I'd point it out. I'd say stuff like, wow, Billy, you're really an amazing artist. You can draw so many things. Or I'd say, Susie, I love how patient you are when Tommy asked you for help. You're so good at helping others. And they'd love that because I wasn't only pointing out their strengths to them, but also the rest of the class heard it too. And it could be the simplest of things too, because you don't only want to praise kids for being great readers or writers, because not everybody in your class is going to be great at those things. But I always thought it was important for everyone to feel like they were great at something. So even if it was that they were good at sharpening pencils and they never broke the lead when they were sharpening it, I'd tell them, Johnny, wow, you sharpened that pencil so fast. You're pretty good at that. And then when somebody asked me to sharpen their pencil, I'd say, you know what? Johnny's really good at sharpening pencils. Can you ask him for help? I think that's his gift. So what happened when I did that was that kids started seeing each other differently. They started seeing each other as valuable and capable and important to our class. Even the kids who were a little different or the kids who struggled socially, they had gifts too. And when kids begin to see themselves and each other that way, kindness starts to grow naturally. Helping someone else just becomes normal. Valuing each other becomes normal. And that's how you begin to build classroom community and how kids can learn to treat each other with kindness. Not with one lesson, not with one book, but with daily choices, intentional language that you're using every day, and modeling what you want your students to become. Because in the end, kindness isn't just something we teach, it's something we show. All right, friends, I hope you got some good ideas today on how you can help your students learn to be kinder to one another. I'll put the links to everything I mentioned today in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I'd really love it if you could take a minute and leave a review. That's really what helps to make my show grow and reach other teachers that might enjoy it too. And so I'd appreciate that so much. All right, friends, until next time, remember to make learning feel like play, and I'll talk to you next week.